Hey, so I thought I'd go through one of the great songs, rock and roll history, Down by the River by Neil Young on his album with Crazy Horse called Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. It's a song lots of people play, one of the first songs lots of people learn on the guitar. One of the things that makes this a great song is the interplay between the two guitarists, Neil Young and the late Danny Whitten, who died unfortunately in 1972. What I really want to focus on in this little video is the interaction between the two guitarists, in particular in the long instrumental or lead or solo breaks, because there's some really interesting stuff going on there. And people tend to focus on Neil Young's soloing, and they leave out the rhythm part that Whitten was playing. But that's really a crucial part to the way the song plays and its effect, and it's got some interesting stuff in it. So first going to go through just the basic chord progression, tell you a little bit about the solo scale that Neil Young uses, and then we'll talk about the lead break and some of the interesting chord formations that Whitten uses. Alright, so very briefly, basic chord structure. E minor 7, A, E minor 7, A, E minor 7, A. It does that a bunch of times. Alright, then when it starts the transition towards the chorus, and I'm not going to sing for you, but when it starts the ooh la la la, she could break me, take me over the rainbow. A lot of people play it as a C. I think they're really, since it goes through it 3 times, the first 2 times it's a C major 7. So you do the C and you just leave off the first finger. So C major 7, B minor, C major 7, B minor, then the full C, B minor, D. Now comes the chorus. G, D, A, G, D, A, and then back to the E minor 7. Alright, so pretty simple chord progression. As we get into the solo and the lead break, the key is going to be to find the different voicings for those basic chords, especially that is the E minor 7 and the A. Now that's something that Neil Young likes to use. Lots and lots of his songs start with a minor chord and then move to a major chord. So we got this song, E minor 7 to the A, great song called Albuquerque. It goes from an E minor to a D. Cowgirl in the Sand goes from an A minor to an F. Let's see what else. Ohio starts with a D minor, goes to an F, and then some other chords as well. Southern Man's got D minor that goes to a B flat. So it's a move that he likes, going from the minor chord to the major. Now as the scale goes, the scale for this song really throughout the whole song that he solos over is just the E minor pentatonic. Alright, so just move it up to the 12th fret. So E minor pentatonic, E, G, A, B, D, E. Now sometimes it's hard to figure out what scale he's using, that is Neil's using when he's soloing, because so much of his soloing tends to focus on just one note or just move back and forth between a couple notes. But there are a couple places in the song where he does an actual extended riff that brings in a bunch of notes that really is the tip-off, so that's what he's using. So the way the song starts when it comes to the lead part is he does this little lick where he slides up from the A to the B and then goes to the D. Then the B sliding down to the A and off, hammer off to the G. Then E, alright, so that's clearly the notes from the E minor pentatonic. Another place where you can see that in action, that scale in action is. It's actually during the first solo break, and then he does another version of it in the second solo break. He does a little descending riff that goes from the so E, D, B, A, and then here's a little interesting twist. He throws in the, we got the G, so we get an extra little note, the F sharp, and that's one that he does use on occasion in other parts of the solo. So just a little extra note added to the basic pentatonic. All right, so that's the basic overview. Let me now go through the rhythm that Witten uses, and then we'll build from there. So the rhythm pattern that Witten uses is really, it's a bit more complex, I think, than most people recognize, and I see people doing cover versions of it. So it's really worth getting some practice and working through it. Spend some time just on the transition between the E minor 7 and the A. He really does continue that pattern through the rest of it. It gets very hard to hear what he's doing in the chorus, the G, D, and A, because Neil Young's guitar comes in so loudly. But work on the pattern just using those first two chords to really get a feel for it. So here, as I hear it, it goes something like this. Actually, let me change the pickup setting. So there's the basic rhythm pattern. Now once the verse and the chorus end, there are a couple measures where they're just slowly strumming it, and Neil's doing a little bit of finger picking of those chords. And then once they do that, then Neil launches into the solo starting with just typical Neil sound, just repeating starting on the E. And off he's running. Now, I want to get to the chords that go on during that solo. A couple things first to point out is that little lick that we started with, from the B up to the D. That's something that actually Witten does as well. And one of the things that makes this song a bit confusing when you're trying to play it is they actually do switch parts at times. At times, Witten's actually doing some of the finger picking, and Neil's playing some actual chords. So they do a little switching back and forth. The key is going to be, as we'll get to later, when Neil's playing chords, he's using the vibrato. So if you listen for that, that's often the indication that it's his part. But that little, sorry. Different places on the neck, you want to be aware of, because that's something that gets thrown in. Now, as the chords go in the extended jam parts, think about the different places where you can voice them. So the first thing is thinking about the E minor 7, up at the 7th fret. Now, something that's important to keep in mind is the E minor is the relative minor of a G major chord. So if there's your G, you can actually find the E minor is right in there. When you fret the E minor 7, you might notice it's really the same notes as the G chord, using the D shape up at the 7th fret and putting your pinky there. Now that's going to be the way I suggest you play the rhythm part. Just think about that formation. Now let me change it up slightly. Use those fingers. So instead of doing it like this, use your first 3 fingers and leave the E open. That's going to give you some options to play it just with those 2nd, 3rd, and 4th string, leaving out the 1st string. Sometimes you can play that little figure with the E string ringing. Another option is to just close it off at the 7th fret and actually fret the high B. So 3 different ways to play that essentially E minor 7th that's very similar to the G chord. And that's going to be one of the keys that Witten uses. Now as for the A chord, I suggest you think about doing an A that again leaves the E open. And one of the things he's going to do, sometimes he's going to leave the E string out completely, sometimes he'll let the E ring, and other times he'll fret it to give the A. Next chord to think about is, we talked about the G at the 7th fret. Well, use the same D shape up at the 9th fret for your A. Up at the 12th fret, you can do a version of an E minor just by borrowing the first 3 strings. Alright, so those are the things you're going to want to make use of. Now, as the transition to the lead break happens, the rhythm completely changes. So we end the rapid rhythm that I was using before, and we start something completely different. So that's what I'm going to try to show you now. Now he alters the rhythm significantly, but ultimately what he's really doing is he's moving back and forth between the E minor 7th up at the 7th and the A here. Sometimes he goes back to it down here with this different rhythm. And he's going to do some variations, as I just talked about, on those 2 chords. But that's where the work happens. Final chord that gets thrown into the mix, as far as Witten's part goes, is use that E minor 7, and then add the extra D. You've already got a D in there, here, but throw in an extra high D by fingering the 10th fret on the 1st string. And that's going to play a crucial part of what I think is one of the crescendos or climaxes of that solo. Alright, so now I'm going to walk you through some of the rhythm patterns and chord changes he uses in the solo section. Now, depending on how much you really want to capture exactly what he's doing, you listen to the record, but here are some examples. He changes up the rhythm, but here's some basic moves that he makes. he's doing that kind of movement throughout. Now, as the tension of the solo builds, he starts striking those chords more emphatically. And then we get that chord I mentioned before. Right when things are really starting to build, add that extra D. And then go to the A on the 9th fret this time. In other words, now what can get confusing is the next thing that happens after he does that. Suddenly we hear, but that's actually Neil Young coming in. Neil Young's actually at times during the solo playing some chords as well. He does an E minor. Again, listen for the vibrato sound. So I've got on my guitar, let's see, on my guitar I've got, there we go, little vibrato system. So when Neil's doing the chord work, he's using the vibrato. And in that crucial moment that I was talking about before, it's around, I think around the 350 mark in the song. Alright, so that's something to keep in mind when Neil's playing the chords versus what Witten is doing. But when Neil Young goes up high and plays that chord, Witten is still sticking with the basic stuff he was doing before. He actually lowers the intensity as Neil raises his. Alright, so some ideas to keep in mind when you're trying to play this great song. Hope that gives you some pointers, recognizing really, as I said, the crucial part is the interplay between those two guitarists. Alright, take it easy.